With the basics, you probably know the answers to this. Who are you?
So my name is Mike Amundsen. I work as an author, API designer, speaker, trainer, and I've been doing this for several decades, and I still enjoy every single day.
Well, I'm a big fan of what you do. I'm going to run down a list here, and I want to see what your thoughts are. So, in the time that I've known you, you've written what 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 books with some additions iterating on there. But so 2011, building hypermedia APIs.
Yeah.
2013, RESTful web APIs. 2016, we got a microservices architecture in there. 2017, RESTful web clients. 2018, and again in 2021 with the second edition, continuous API management with your gang of your crew there. And then designing and building great web APIs in 2020. And then we've got RESTful web API patterns and practices 2022.
Mm-hmm.
So first question, what did you learn along the way?
I learn something new every time I write, every time I try to sit down and write. And what I think one of the things, first of all, I should point out, most of those books were collaborations. I think only 3 of the ones that you listed were ones where I was just the solo writer. And one of the things I learned is I love working with collaborators. I love working with other people. I think one of the other things that I learned when I'm writing is you write for the time you have, you write for the time you're in. There's a lot of change between that building book and the patterns book, and that whatever that is, like 10 years or so or something like that. And that change reflects change in the environment, change in the audience, change in myself. So one of the other things that I learn when I write is what's going on right now. So there's always a reflection. When I go back and I look at one of these books, it reminds me of the time it was in. I don't know if that's always works for readers, but it's one of the things that I've learned is that there's a transience and a change that you can capture when you see things in a list like this. I don't know if that makes sense, but that's what comes to mind.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I'm not a book publisher like you are. I have a handful, but I think they're very much time capsules in the way, and some of the RESTful hypermedia stuff, the microservices, like I definitely have timestamps on some of those thoughts because I experienced some of your stories on stage. And so they very much, I look at them in similar ways. And I'm saying, and we can, in between these, we can talk about anything. I'm going to chop all this up.
Sure.
Use the bits and pieces. But so I see the word web a lot in those titles.
Yeah.
What has changed, or what, when you first started writing those, how do you feel about the web today? What are your just general thoughts on?
So the web to me in the very earliest stages, when I first experienced it in the late 90s and the early aughts, the web to me represented a kind of a collaboration space, a cooperative space, an open space. And I'm paraphrasing here, one of the things I learned from Ted Nelson is his idea of the web. Ted's credited with the notion of the hyperlink, hypertext, hyperlinks, and all that kind of stuff. Ted thought of this idea that the web would be a place where anyone can say anything about everything without having to get permission. It was supposed to be this place where we could all just kind of contribute anytime we want to connect up and amplify and so on and so forth. And that's what attracted me to it. It attracted me greatly to that idea of being able to connect on my own. Over the decades, the web now to me represents commerce, represents storefront, represents sort of like a mining operation. It is not at all what I had what I imagined it was 25 years ago. And I think we're kind of less for that. I really think, I think we needed, and we still need, that kind of open collaborative space. And I don't think we have it as much as I think we need it.
Like that. I think the commercialization, I think that reflects our physical space in this country as well, to a certain degree.
Yeah.
Our public space,
Yeah.
public lands, shared common grounds. I think I like that you use mining in there, and extraction and other things.
Yeah, I think, you know, the whole notion of third space, right? This whole notion of a place where we can go, a park, you know, a place where we can hang out, a forest, a woodland, a pathway, where we're not at home, and we're not at work, and we're just out and interacting with people. That's kind of the way I thought the web would be, that it would be this third space, this safe place, this place where you could go. And I don't think that's what it is right now. I think it could be, but I miss that aspect of it.
It feels a lot like public spaces, in that the town square, not necessarily public meaning government owned or public,
Oh, yeah.
but it could, but it feels like kind of what Starbucks has done to our public spaces and public square. Is we felt like we had a common space, but now it's kind of becoming the opposite.
Yeah, and to me, there's an awful lot of privatization and monetization of so many things we do. Just our conversations can, get monetized. Our conversations can get mined. Our conversations can be broken apart into smaller bits and reassembled and profitized in some kind of way, and that's frustrating to me.
And I would add just different level of surveillance and scrutiny and aspects of public that aren't always good, I would say, on display. And I read an article this week on the club scene in New York, and that it's dying out and diminishing because people don't want to be videotaped and put on social media, and they don't want to be shamed on TikTok, and they want to go dance. They want to go let themselves free. So what are we doing here?
Yeah, no, I agree with that. I haven't read that piece, but it sounds very compelling. Yeah.
One more on the books before we move on is, what are your thoughts on microservices from 2016 till now, after a decade of microservices? What are your thoughts?
I think, like so many other things, microservices a decade ago became the hotness, right? It was like, oh, we're doing microservices. Sort of like people say now we're doing MCP or whatever the hotness is. I think microservices are just as valuable and powerful as they were 10 years ago, 15 years ago. I think the space is also just as littered with productization and misinformation as anything else in the world. I still employ a lot of microservices in the things that I do here in my little laboratory. I think Lambda and lots of other things like that are still very, very useful. So yeah, that's sort of a great example of sort of the time capsule-ish nature. So the microservice architecture book that I and Matt McClarty and Irakli Nader-Eshvili and Ronnie Mitra wrote, what was that? Is that somewhere around in the teens? That book, I think, captures our attempt to kind of capture the essence of what we thought microservices were. I think most of that stuff is still true, but the landscape for products and services has changed vastly. I think they're incredibly powerful and valuable, especially when you think about linking them actively together and actually using them as tools rather than as destinations, if that makes sense.
Agreed. And I would say just one last note on your books and the time capsule-ness of them. I still very much in my head, I have a copy of that book, and when I look at it, I'm very much in 2016, 2017 mindset, which I enjoy and I find actually very valuable, because I can contrast with the bot movement that was there was a bot movement in the similar. So other things, and similar to reading books on hypertext and hyperlinks and cybernetics and other things.
Yeah.
I find value in going back and looking at, because they're timeless issues, even though they were 50, 60, 70 years ago. And I think your work's going to be discovered for a long time to come.
Well, that's generous. I think I agree with you in the sense that there's a transportation for me when I read cybernetics books and early computing books. I get that same feeling because part of that time capsule is even just the language of the writing, right? What the vocabulary is and how things are spoken sort of sets me in that time frame, and I enjoy that. That's one of the things I really enjoy about reading in general is being transported. So I get that same feeling. I think that's very cool.
So building on vocabulary and being transported in words, let's start with hypermedia. I think there's a renewed energy, interest, discussions around hypermedia. What is hypermedia?
Well, the way I think about hypermedia is a little bit more mundane than Ted Nelson's original description of hypertext and hyperlinks. But it's this, to me, it's this notion of being able to make connections. It's the connections themselves that I think are most powerful, not the endpoints, not the things on either end. It's the active traffic, it's the active connection. And I think building computer systems where you can make these connections in real time, what Alan Kay called extreme late binding, where you can wait until the last possible moment to connect two things together rather than plan ahead, creates a very dynamic space. So for me, hypermedia is this notion of being able to make connections. And then in order to make those connections, you need to have a lot of meta information, a lot of descriptive information. That's what a form in HTML is, right? It says, here's the thing you want to do is like check out, but there's a method and there's a protocol and there's a media type and there's arguments and there's headers and all these other things. So hypermedia is this world where we describe how to make these connections in real time and have all the information we need in order to kind of make that a successful connection. And then that creates something new. Every connection creates something new.
Yeah, a powerful way of describing, I think, connections in a space I think takes a lot for granted when it comes to what a connection is, what a link might be. There's a lot of devil in those details. There's a lot of goodness in those details.
Yeah.
And I'm going to work towards ontology, taxonomy, choreography, and the things that but I want to work my way through the people, I think, who kind of laid the foundation here. So Paul Otlet, civic, you call him the civic information architect. So what's the role of information architecture in getting us in delivering this meaning?
Yeah, Otlet comes from 100 years ago. Otlet was alive in the 1920s, 1930s, and he had this notion of connections just the way we described it. You could, in the 1920s, he thought of this idea that you could listen to a radio program on demand. You could watch video on demand or a movie on demand at that time. You could collect up information. He had this vision of creating this whole city of information builders where people with domain experts would come visit the city and get interviewed, and all that information would be placed on cards, and those cards could be collected together to create a new monograph or a new article, and you could actually send a message and get the answer back. Basically, he was describing what Google search could possibly be, sort of a punk version of Google search in 1920. And Otlet thought that the way this was going to work is that domain experts would visit and collaborate and interact with each other in this kind of Alexandria of the future, this kind of digital informational Alexandria. So that's why I refer to him as the civic architect, the civic information architect, because he thought information would be the thing that brings us together, that shows our commonality, and then creates this shared understanding that we could build upon. And that Otlet has a very interesting life, not all of it positive. He suffered a lot of anguish in his life, but he represents to me such a positive thinking mind in between the wars. He experienced both World War I and World War II in Europe, in Belgium, and he has some wonderful, I think, ways to explain what he thought the future could be, and I like that very much.
I think those lessons of that people learned in those wars, I think apply today in many ways, and there's a lot of lessons into why we should be thinking about and reading the works of these people. Next one in the list, Ted Nelson, and your label, your description of him is the literary radical, which I didn't expect for a description of Ted. Why that?
Well, Ted always had a very literary, very now I won't say academic, but it was for creativity, it's for writers. He went to Sarah Lawrence College. He didn't get a computer science degree. When he moved out to California, he hung out at the beach. He was a radical in sort of the 60s sense, like the real 1960s radical sort of idea. He wanted to tear down edifices. He wanted to tear down the walls between companies and organizations. He wanted to free information so anybody could say anything anywhere, like I had talked about earlier. And he was a rabble rouser. To this day, Ted is still alive and well, at least as of a couple of months ago. Then I talked to him. He still rails against, the man or whatever the institutions are as impediments to connecting people together. And that's really all he wanted to do. And so he was very much a radical, and his web was not about forms. He never thought about forms the way I described what I thought hypermedia was. He thought about it as connections. He wanted a world where every time I made a connection to you, everybody could see that my connection was to you, that what the provenance was. This wasn't something I took. This is something that I shared. And they could follow the lead all the way down to its original source every single time. He also envisioned that every time I would share a little snippet of you, you would get a penny or two. And then anybody else who consumed that information also gave you a penny. It's sort of a world of penny jars kind of thing. No massive media management, no massive privatization of anything, just sharing back and forth. And then for that, I kind of think of him as really a radical character in this story.
Which I would link back to the origin of this conversation here of connections. Like, I think that is necessary for building meaningful connections on and offline. Third up, Wendy Hall, steward of links.
Yeah, Wendy, Dame Wendy Hall, right? So Wendy Hall created this system called Microcosm, which was, she was actually charged with building a library installation and handling all of the personal effects and papers of Britain's Lord Mountbatten, who was a revered character. And so she helped build a digital system. She encoded all of his documents, encoded images and all sorts of other things, and collected it together in a hypermedia environment. You could look at a picture and then point at a person, and then that would point you to their content. You could read one of his papers, his diary, his reports, and then automatically get click on that and get taken to the material. She built this entire system, all not on the web, but just through direct connection on the computer itself, fully functional when Tim Berners-Lee, Sir Tim Berners-Lee, was really just starting his notion of what the web could be. So Wendy Hall had already built a fully working system, along with a large team. And so I love the way she approached this problem. She also knew Ted Nelson. She knew Douglas Engelbart, the guy who invented the mouse and gave us our mother of all demos. And they had a rather radical, different way to think about the way you would actually express this hypermedia information. That the links were not actually embedded in the content, the links were a layer. So that I could have my set of links on Lord Mountbatten's report, you could have your set of links, we could switch them, share them, and that way authoring links or authoring connections was really at a different level. You never had to alter the document itself. And that's something that I think, that's why I think of her contribution as this way of sort of being a steward or a shepherd of the links themselves.
I like that. I love that view of the annotated, the overlay view, and how we can all work together in defining something.
And didn't we have that too? Annotations, right? I mean, the WC3, didn't they actually later on do something very, very similar? I know it's not too popular, but I think this notion of my annotations to your content, may enrich your content in some way, but it doesn't alter it. And I love that idea.
Yeah, and I think again the connections, you can get the version of that doc from the connections that matter to you most, with the annotations and overlay that speak to what you're trying to achieve or get out from the document. Fourth one, Leonard Richardson, the collaborative realist.
Yeah, Leonard is a brilliant thinker, a brilliant technologist. In the last couple decades, Leonard spent a great deal of time democratizing library books, digitizing library books, and the whole check-in and check-out process through the New York Public Library. A fantastic thinker. He also is he's a novelist in his own right. Some very creative science fiction novels that he's written. I learned so much from Leonard. Leonard was the lead writer on the book RESTful Web Services, which really was one of the breakout books in the early aughts over this idea. I think it was 2008 or something, over this idea of hyperlinks and REST and so on and so forth. So later we collaborated together in RESTful Web APIs. So it's a little more geared toward APIs. And I learned so much in working with Leonard on that book. Leonard taught a great lesson at an event called RESTfest, which you have generously been supportive of over the years. And he pointed out that the idea of hypermedia and these connections that Wendy Hall had talked about and Ted Nelson had envisioned and Otlet wanted to foster, those connections work when the two parties you're dealing with are in a collaborative space or a cooperative space. They worked fantastically well when he helped set up library servers that could share books across the planet. So that if you got a library card in the New York Public Library, but you want to read a book that's in Denmark, you could do that easily. But this hypermedia, this collaborative working environment isn't very conducive when you're in a profit-making world, when you're not collaborators, but you're competitors. So when you're a competitor, this idea of hypermedia isn't very inviting because it levels the playing field. It makes it easy for anyone to get enter into the marketplace. Whereas often for privatization, what you really want is you want barriers to entry. You want moats, not boats. So Leonard really, I love that Leonard really pointed out, and people can find this lecture and find much more nuance than I can give it. This idea that hypermedia works when we want to cooperate and collaborate, but it is not really inviting when we want to compete with each other.
I mean, exactly what I was trying to get at as far as the substance, the richness behind hypermedia, behind connections that are very human, but moving into a digital realm. And I think we could keep going, and maybe we'll do another segment on Norbert Weiner, Claude Shannon, Alan Turing, JCR Licklider.
Oh my gosh, yeah.
You know, think of the overlays, the annotations of our current technology and world brought by those folks. I think, but what I'm trying to get to, I'm trying to get to, you have another couple definitions of ontology, taxonomy, and choreography. So ontology being the naming with intent, the choreography making the moves explicit. Taxonomy is where the meaning meets movement. And so, like, what's the role? What's the segmentation here with ontology, taxonomy, and choreography as it applies to like where we want to be with hypermedia?
Well, that's an interesting shift. So I learned about this whole notion of ontology and taxonomy and choreography from a handful of people, and what I think is really, really powerful is this idea that This whole modeling of information, as you just mentioned it, as sort of meaning, as movement, and as cooperation or coordination, really started in this idea of information architecture, and the idea of, instead of like microservice architecture, information architecture. How do we arrange information? Librarians constantly work on this problem. How do we make this information accessible? How do we make links viewable, seeable, actionable, and all those kinds of things? And one of the people who really brought the notion of information architecture to the common language was a gentleman by the name of, oh my gosh, I can't remember his name. I want to say it's Saul Bass, but we're going to do some research, right? Okay, I want to fix this part. It's the person who created TED events, TEDx and TED events. He was an architect, and he was interested in education and information. So this whole notion of these three things are all about how we can organize the sort of the meta world of the information and how it connects. And I learned to apply that material in a couple of different ways. So I and a couple other people came up with a format called ALPS, which is a profile for semantic information that you share with everyone, and also in the notion of actually building services in ways that you can actually establish the meaning and share the meaning between various services through this sort of late binding that we talked about earlier. So this, while we talked about, I kind of went through this laundry list of history and how people were kind of thinking how the big picture would work. This ontology, taxonomy, and choreography is really sort of getting down to the details of how we actually build information systems that other people can use. I use a phrase. Think about this notion of building something for someone you'll never meet to solve problems you never thought of. That's what good information architecture does. It allows other people to solve problems you haven't thought of. And I think that's a very powerful way to think about it.
Yeah, nice segue. I think you took it better where I wanted to go, better than I could have.
Okay.
I'm trying to get to eventually here a concept of capabilities, which is kind of floating around the space right now. And what your article, Christian Posta, Daniel Kokot, there's a few people that are kind of throwing this around right now, and I'm looking to build on that and speak to a lot of the missing elements, the missing nutrients in the connections I think that we've talked about. And I'll throw on the table, even so, I'm willing to push back into the background API as an acronym, as a term, because I feel like I've maybe done some damage by having it out so far out front, where we should be talking in more plain language and more. But let's start with what does the word capabilities mean to you in this context?
Right. So first of all, I love Christian Posta's article. He kind of did this great review, right? People can find Christian Posta's piece, and you'll talk to him directly. This great review of sort of different views of thinking about what capabilities are and why we should think about them. I love the general idea. We talked a little bit about capabilities in the microservice architecture book, because Irakli Nadarashvili is the one who introduced me to this general way of thinking about capabilities. His little line, I think his line was something like, we need to stop thinking in terms of data and start thinking in terms of capabilities. My variation on that is, people don't really care about what your data, they care what they can do with it. And I think that's a capability model. So when I think of capabilities, I think of literally the ability to do something, to compute something, to move something, to create something, to edit, whatever the case be. And those capabilities become things that we deal with every single day in the world. Now, a much more academic-y way of thinking about that is the word affordance. I've talked about affordances before when I talk about hypermedia. Affordances are the things we have in our environment. This cup is an affordance. It affords me drinking coffee. It also, if we're in the same room, it affords me throwing it at you if I was angry for some reason, right? There's all sorts of things we can do, and our environment is full of them, and we actually, arrange our environment so we have all our favorite affordances, my favorite cup, my favorite pen, and so on and so forth. So capabilities are just like that. This is the ability to solve a problem, the ability to discover something, the ability to create something. And I love this idea of thinking in capabilities because it takes us back to that microservice idea, takes us back to that hypermedia and that connection, and gives us the power to start assembling from all of the affordances we have on our desk or in our room or in our house or whatever the case may be, and creating a great experience.
You took it faster. I actually literally have ask Mike about relationship between affordances and capabilities, like literally on my list here. So
I am so predictable.
very good one. Very good one. So talk about the capability. So to reiterate what I heard is your ability, the capability for you to drink a cup of coffee in your office requires a whole series of affordances and systems that may not be related to your office and to, the cup is a very portable one, but your coffee, I'm assuming, is made in a different room,
right?
A different system, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, the cup is the container, that allows me to move that coffee around, right? It's that ontology, taxonomy, choreography that we were just talking about seconds ago. That's the way my brain works. Yes. And those seemingly unrelated systems, the person who built the coffee maker and all those other things knows nothing about my office and my things in my cup. And the person who made this cup knows nothing about my office and so on and so forth. These are all self-contained, self-sustaining systems. And our world, our earth, our universe is full of these fully functional self-containing systems that are sort of have permeable membranes that we can sort of interact with, we can enlist in some kind of way. And that's what I like doing with information, is finding those same containers and enmeshing them and enlisting them and bringing them together to create something valuable and interesting, even if it's only for a second or two, even if it's only for a moment. That active creativity and that active collaboration really, really gets me going. That's what I love doing.
Yeah. Do you feel like we don't always have the right people in the room when it comes to creating some of these services that if we want to be capable of something, should we just have an engineer in the room? Should we, who should be in the room?
Well, yeah, so that's actually excellent. The right person in the room is a great perspective. No, I think most of the times, this is self-selecting because it's the kind of work that I do and it's the kind of people I deal with. But I think most of the times we don't have enough people in the room. I mean, all the people that are there have something very valuable to offer, but I don't think we have enough perspectives or enough capabilities in the room at the same time. There are so many seemingly unrelated things that can connect. So I think one of the big challenges for any operation, any organization of any type, whether it's digital or otherwise, is getting enough capabilities in the room, enough perspectives in the room to build really great and creative things. There are lots of lived experiences that I don't have that need to be represented in systems that I interact with and create with every single day. And there are lots of lived experiences just, in the story of this cup that if I would take a minute, I could probably learn from. It's not just that I bought it at the store, but it's the person who's working at the store, and it's the truck driver who brought it to the store, and it's the people at the factory, and so on and so forth. All of these things affect my life. And I think we don't always appreciate the value or the extra effort, the extra oomph you get when you bring in new capabilities. You say, can you come here and take a look at this? Can you give me your perspective? Can you give me your point of view? We need a lot of points of view. And again, that's what Ted was talking about, right? Anybody, anything, everything, anywhere. And I think we need more and more of that.
Yeah, and I think there's a lot that goes into what Mike wants, what Mike needs, what makes it so Mike can move through his day through the world each day. And there's a lot of talk about getting help with this and having what people are calling right now an agent or an
Yep.
agentic person,
Yep.
which I struggle with in terms of that choreography or automation or workflows or whatever angle people are coming out with. I'm dizzy from the perspectives. And back to the words we use, and I think the importance of Ted Nelson being a literary radical and information architecture is the word AI agent. I'm quoting Mark O'Neill here. Is for many vendors, the term AI agent has come to mean a deterministic flow, drag and join nodes of a workflow builder, which very much contrasts. I mean, there's older ML and AI people's definition of agent. There's kind of this newer. The newer is more an agentic describes systems, particularly artificial intelligence, that possess proactively to achieve a specific goal with minimal human interaction. So I just feel like we're taking a lot for granted if we're doing drag and drop flows and considering something deterministic when we actually are saying we're going to create something that's goal-based. Or so how does all this translate into agents as you would see it right now?
Yeah, that's an excellent perspective, and it's something that I've talked about on and off for the last almost decade, and certainly within the last couple of years. I really appreciate Mark's perspective on this. The idea of setting up a static flow is not what I think of as an agent-driven system. There's no agency in setting up a static flow. What I think about when we really think about the way we interact with things, we set a goal. Donald Norman has this notion of this wheel of how we interact with the world. We set a goal. We act on that goal. We make a change to something, and we see if that gets us to the goal. And if it doesn't, we make a new plan or a new step. And all of this has to do with this idea of planning, setting a goal and planning to get there. That goal might be to turn the light on. The goal might be to walk around the world to raise money for something, right? So agentic systems to me are systems that have agency. I can give them a goal. Maybe I can help them plan. There's sort of a variation of planners. We've been talking about planners in AI for decades. And then you say, go, like, buy me a Coke, get me a shirt, help me solve my banking problem, whatever. So there has to be some kind of agency for me to think about it as an agentic system. And that means that there's some character, some agent acting on my behalf that can interact with the capabilities that are available in the environment around me. Often when I talk about this space, you've heard me do this, I talk about harvester ants and all the things that Melanie Mitchell and others, Deborah Gordon, have taught us about the way systems interact in this way, and the way ants communicate. Ants communicate not by talking to each other, but by leaving clues around, leaving pheromones and things like this around that affect other people as they go by, other ants as they go by. And I think successful agentic systems do the same thing. This is my opinion, that we need to build environments where we can leave clues around, and then systems can say, oh, I need the ability to do some mathematical calculation. That's a capability right there that I see in the environment, and I can use it. So agentic systems to me are some agency, some ability to navigate a space in order to reach a goal. And that may or may not include planning ahead of time. We do planning like sort of ad hoc and instantaneously. There are very complex planner systems for AI and for robotics and all those other kinds of things. I think we need to be moving sort of toward planless. And that's where connections and hypermedia and capabilities all kind of come together, I think.
Yeah, no, well said. I think the goal-based and the semantics, the affordances, the business alignment, the ubiquitous language, maybe a domain, present here.
That's great.
To kind of bring this. But when if I'm in a conversation with folks and they're talking about creating ops agents for ops, internal, and I give them all of Jira and GitHub's, all the APIs, all just exploded into Lego bricks all by themselves, and say, make your way through this. If you have a goal, we aren't able to do it, and people's eyes tend to gloss over, and they go back to kind of just talking agentic and kind of words that are fairly meaningless, and rather than, well, how does that Lego, all those Legos on the floor, become something that we can actually work through? What are the semantics that are needed for me to understand what a repo is, what a Jira ticket is, what the state of those things are? And I think we're not having those conversations, and that's why I'm glad people are bringing up Hypermedia, and I'm glad people bring up semantics, and I'm hoping Alps gets another crack at what's going on here. But what can we do to bring, I guess, all the folks who haven't lived through the Hypermedia, haven't lived through JSON LD or Alps, or the Hypermedia battles that we did back in the day? What do you share with folks who are trying to do agentic?
Well, so one of the things that comes to mind immediately is semantics. I can't remember the author of the book Semantics, but one of the lines from that book is, a complex system that works well is guaranteed to have started as a simple system that works well. You don't start with all of the possible endpoints in GitHub or all the possible endpoints in your CI/CD system. You don't start there. You end there. Where you start is at the smallest, tiniest little level, and you just keep layering and layering and layering. So the ability to actually solve one particular problem becomes a capability that somebody else could use. And if somebody else does something with that, that becomes another capability that somebody else can use. And you build it stack by stack by stack. I don't know enough about biological systems to understand how they interact. But what I've read, what I've gleaned, is this very notion that we're systems upon systems upon systems. We're tiny little cells that work, but there's lots and lots of them. So, I think the way we need to think about solving our problems isn't by tackling the big problem first. It's by tackling the small problem first. And building individual capabilities is a great way to do that. One of the experimental projects I worked on this summer, which is sort of a goal-oriented system that's affordance-based, is a system I call Grail. So you basically connect a bunch of pieces in a room and put them in an environment together, and you say, you need to update this person's email address. So what you do is, where we think of a plan like a map, like I've got to start from here and somehow get to fixing that email, I say, no, what you do is you immediately try doing the email. And the email says, no, you're not logged in yet. So then you race over and you log in, and then you go try doing the email. It says, no, you don't have a change hash. Oh, I go get you a change hash. So you design an agent that simply keeps trying to solve the problem and gets feedback enough to solve one more layer, one more step, one more unit. And eventually you treat that whole email change agent experience as one capability. Now you can kick off that capability and you can change email. You can also make that make a copy of that and say, change name or change location or change address. So now you're building a system of capabilities that are agentic, that have agency, but you didn't do it by designing an editing environment. You did it by taking one element and changing one element at a time. So I think our success in this space is going to be, as you say, thinking about capabilities and thinking about the ways we interact with them, in a late binding experience. And the way I have been experimenting lately is, while it's not fully deterministic, it is not anarchy. It is not just magical. There is a pattern to it, and you could eventually even create efficiencies and say, you know what, before I start, I'm going to go ahead and log in, and then I'm going to try and see something. And we can use LLMs and other things to help us learn efficient pathways through these gated systems. And I think that's a much more reasonable way to tackle the problem right now with the technology that we have.
Like that. Good advice. Now, what are your recommendations for the same kids when you're in a seminar where you're talking about what you just talked about, the different capabilities and how they work, and we're working through this, and someone says, hey, this is great, but you know what? I have a field of yellow tulips over here with a new red stripe that seem really cool and really interesting. And if we could come up with an agentic system to grow these, we could make lots of money. And they totally disrupt your train of thought and what you're working on. And oh, I just shifted your budget over. You no longer have a budget for this workshop that you were just conducting. We're going to go talk about my tulips because they're pretty and they're valuable, and we're going to make a lot of money. So what are your recommendations for kids to stay grounded when things like that happen?
Yeah, it's a great question, and a question I struggled with my entire life, and actually relates a lot to the story I was telling you about how Leonard started to talk about the conditions under which making connections and hypermedia and so on and so forth become valued elements. They're in these cooperative spaces. So very often, I'm not quite sure if this is where you're headed, but I will just share that often I lived a double life. I would continue to do research. I would continue to do experiments. I would continue to read cybernetics books from the 40s and the 30s. I would continue to dig around in this area that did not interest any Silicon Valley people. It did not interest anybody with a lot of investment capital. At the same time, I would help people who are trying to figure out how to best create the Tulip API so that they could build their company and do whatever they want to do. And sometimes those same people were investing in some experiments and so on and so forth. The way it used to work is AT&T, this gigantic telephone company in the United States, used to have a research department. And that research was all pure research. It wasn't applied research. It was like, why don't we hire Claude Shannon, and we'll talk, and Claude can start to work on what information looks like and what a bit is and so on and so forth. Someday that may accrue to us, but let's just let them do their thing. I don't see enough of that right now. And that could be just where I am. Maybe it's going on a lot, but I would really love to see that what we think of as Silicon Valley investors spending more and more time supporting pure research rather than monetizable or privatizable projects. So I would tell anybody in the room, keep some part of your pure research ideas alive. Don't let anybody convince you that what you're interested in isn't interesting. You may need to change the way you talk about it. You may need to change the way you implement it. You may need to change the way you share it, but it's still interesting. Don't ever stop. It's the people who run against, it's the radicals like Ted who run against the tide. It's the visionaries like Otlet. It's the Wendy Halls of the world who actually build things that are working before anybody asks. Those are the people that I think really make a difference, and you can be a difference maker without being rich.
Yeah, no, you took it exactly where I wanted to go. So thank you. I think that's great advice. I'm two levels I heard in there to reiterate back is one, how do you create spaces for creatives and people to kind of move things forward? The Bell Labs, the Claude Shannon, literally on a unicycle juggling balls down the hallway as he works on information theory, which I feel like is very appropriate for what we do. Yes. How do you create a space for these people, pay them a living wage and then some? I've tried to maintain programs like this. It's hard. And we need more people who are willing to spend VC money doing so, I would say. But the lower level concern that you also addressed on is right now I come up against a lot of folks who are feeling very discouraged, and they're just trying to keep their jobs. They're just they want to be capable of paying their mortgage and having health care. And so when their programs and their work and their jobs get disrupted by, hey, I need you to launch a Copilot with some MCP servers, how do we help them be successful despite it not being the right call? So
sure. Well, I think another thing that it's important if we're getting into the nitty gritties is I want to create as large a no judgment zone as possible, right? I want to create that kind of third space where, yeah, I'm working on this MCP thing because my work colleagues need an MCP thing in order to get to their goals. That doesn't make me an evil person. I got lots of other ideas that I could be working on, but I'm working on this now. And there's stuff like that all the time. There are always examples of sort of, this ebb and flow of activity. And as long as my point really, I think, at least it's what kind of kept me going, is as long as you maintain the spark, as long as you continue to chip away, even if you have to set it aside for a time in order to solve some immediate problems, as long as you maintain the spark, you're going to get somewhere. You're going to get closer to your goal. You're going to meet incredibly interesting and creative people along the way. You're going to get to learn an awful lot. So for all those reasons, as difficult as it is, I run into people every single day who are generous, creative, helpful, and really live in a world in their minds about a wonderful place. And what they're really trying to do right now is exactly what you said, just rub two coins together. But that doesn't stop them from being generous. It doesn't stop them from being helpful, and it doesn't stop them from being optimistic. So it's a challenge, but I think it's something we can all do.
And that's exactly, I think that'll be the ending point right there. I'm going to say goodbye, pretend, to go say goodbye, but we'll stick around here.
Sure.
I really appreciate you coming by today, Mike. Always love chatting with you. Thanks so much.
It's great talking to you. Thank you very much. I love it.
Good stuff. Yeah, covered all